Welcome to Mokena's Front Porch, a Mokena history podcast with Matt Galick and me, Israel Smith. All right, Matt, tonight we're going to talk about the story of a local Mokena blacksmith, Braun.
Yeah, Braun.
So tell us a little bit, before we get into the story, where was his blacksmith shop located?
Yeah, so Mr. Braun's blacksmith shop was on Front Street, right exactly where Resales for Rescue is nowadays, the Nas resale shop, or where some of our residents who have been around here quite a long time would remember the post office having been here.
Yeah, and what years are we talking about here?
So this piece that I had written and it was on the blog was focused on a gentleman by the name of Albert Braun, or Al Braun, and he was in business there from about 1903, 1904, right up to the end of the 1950s. So he was in business there for quite a long time, although his father, Henry Braun, who was also a blacksmith, had been there as far back as the 1880s in a different building, but...
And clearly, to a town at this time, a blacksmith was a huge need. There was a huge need for him to fix things, and that.
Oh, sure.
What kind of things did people expect of the blacksmith?
All kinds of stuff. If it was metal or iron work, he could fix it. He was a big part of his business. Mr. Braun's business was the shoeing of horses. People would take their horses to a shop where they would be shod, as well as Mr. Braun was. He had a heart for children too, the Mokena kids, and they all knew that if something ever went wrong with a bike or if a younger child like a tricycle, they could take it to him and he'd be able to fix it.
And then before we get into the story, talk for a little bit of context. Who are some of his neighbors and fellow shop owners at the time that we would know from the stories we've talked about?
Yeah, let's see here. He was in business, or he opened up his own business right around the same time that Frank Hirsch had opened his saloon on Front Street, which, of course, as we know, is in the same building that Little Al's is in nowadays. He was in. Let's see who else was going on. He would have been in business at the same time as the Zumstein General Store, which stood in the historic building where Curtain Call is nowadays, the old Kerber Pharmacy. He was also a contemporary of let's see who else. There's like all these people trying to come in the door at once. He would have been a contemporary of a gentleman by the name of Richard Hensel, who was a pharmacist in town, who would later go on to establish a pharmacy in the Zumstein building, which I just mentioned. But around this time, Mr. Hensel was just leaving his pharmacy in the building on the northeast corner of Front and Mokena Streets. So these were all people that he would have known in his time in business in Mokena.
Well, great. That's a great context. I think it kind of creates a living picture for us.
Yeah.
It's easy sometimes when we hear these stories to think that they're just people we hear stories about, but these are the same as, Dino, and down at et cetera. And, all the people, that are business owners now. This is just in their time. I mean, these are real stories, people that are
absolutely
going through amazing changes in our town as well as in our country.
Oh, sure.
So, and obviously, like you said, the blacksmith played a major role, overall kind of fix-it handyman, repair guy for the town. So,
absolutely.
All right. Well, let's go back about 121 years and hear the story of Al Braun.
Businesses are the face of a community. making up the patchwork that ultimately composes the identity of a neighborhood. At the heart of every house of commerce stands a proprietor, a face behind the counter that becomes intertwined with the trade. In the pages of our village's illustrious past stands a man who was as much a fixture in Mokena as Hickory Creek or the Rock Island Railroad. In his Front Street shop, the sparks flew, and the man in the middle was blacksmith Albert Braun. As a man whose life story is truly Mokenian, irony would have it that his earliest years were spent in the New Lenox Township hamlet of Spencer, where he was born October 3rd, 1879. The son of sturdy Bavarian immigrants Henry and Caroline Braun, the family moved to Mokena when Albert was a mere lad. The elder Braun was himself a blacksmith, and for reasons lost to history, refused to teach his only son the trade. Al, as he came to be known, managed to find a willing mentor in Frankfurt, under whose guiding hand he learned the skill. Braun worked as the smith's apprentice for 3 years, during which time he lived in the neighboring village, venturing home to Mokena to spend weekends with his family, sometimes traversing the 3-mile journey by foot. L. Braun moved back to Mokena in 1903, where the 24-year-old became his father's business partner. His return was heralded by the village correspondent in the Lockport Phoenix Advertiser, who affably called him a good workman, and noted that the townfolk wished him success in the venture. The same year, the Brauns began construction of a huge 2-story building that would serve as their new shop. The new frame rose over Front Street like a colossus, and featured huge double doors to facilitate the coming and going of horse-drawn wagons. Inside, a few stalls were built to accommodate waiting horses, and before long, the place would be filled with tools, anvils, and bellows to stoke the ever-burning forge. After the sudden death of Henry Braun in 1904, sole proprietorship of the business became Al's. In the days before common auto ownership, Braun's bread and butter was the shoeing of horses. Dozens upon dozens of the iron shoes hung from the shop's ceiling. One day in the dreadful winter of 1908, when at least 3 inches of ice covered the mud roads in and around the village, he was later said to have shod a record number of 64 horses, which eventually multiplied to a dizzying 340 jobs within 10 days. Mokena writer Ada Westland remembered decades later that Braun was also a master of fixing wagon wheels warped by unforgiving summer heat, first by forging new iron rims and then by fusing wood and metal together in cold water. The life of an early 20th century blacksmith was not without danger. Mokena liveryman Henry Stellwagen was bowled over by a horse while helping in the shop one day in 1906, while the same year Braun's face was nastily lacerated when a chunk of iron flew up from the anvil. Aside from being a tradesman, L. Braun was one of Mokena's most respected residents. He served as a village trustee from 1912 to 1945, in an era that saw much transformation in town, overseeing, among other changes, the replacement of antiquated wooden sidewalks with concrete ones in the early 20th century, and the later introduction of electricity and gas service. Braun was also active in St. John's Church, where he looked after cemetery matters and rung the congregation's bell to herald Sunday services. Braun also had heart for his fellow man, shown on the occasion he sheltered a homeless woman in passing through the village, or when he looked out for Mokena's children in the countless times he fixed their wagons and tricycles. Local sage Clinton Krause later wrote that he was a good citizen of Mokena, and everyone loved him very much. As Braun got on in age, he wasn't as active in the Front Street shop, and the ubiquitous presence of horses faded. He was kept busy with general repair work, but still made house calls to area farms, and by the 1950s was hired to travel as far away as Aurora to shoe horses. L. Braun crossed the great beyond on April 6, 1958, having reached 78 years. He was thought to be the last blacksmith in the region, and had worked at the trade in Mokena for over half a century. His old shop was erased from the landscape in 1960, Nowadays, the site is occupied by the building at 11134 Front Street. The old building that witnessed so many of L. Braun's labors is gone, but his memory lives on.
So, Matt, Mr. Quinn shared a really cool photo on Facebook recently of the shop of Al Braun.
Yeah.
So maybe give a little visual picture of that for us, if you could.
Yeah. Two-story building of very common construction that one would see in the earliest years of the 20th century. Had a little peak in the front roof that stuck up from the false front of the building. Had a kind of almost like L-shaped, we could say, with one portion of the building that kind of ran north and south, and then there was a wing that came off to the west side, and the whole building was devoted just to blacksmithing and repair work and place for the horses that were waiting to be shod and stuff like this. It was a big building. And
we said it's on the site of what is now the NAWS, the old post office.
Yes.
And did it have that footprint? It didn't go all the way back to Front Street or First Street.
It did not. It did not go all the way back. In fact, Mr. Braun's house was directly north of there.
Okay.
He later built that house, but yeah, it did not go all the way back to First Street. But nevertheless, took up quite a lot of space.
You know, and one of the things I thought was interesting is, you know, the idea of a blacksmith really is, you know, perpetuates the idea of repair versus replace, right?
Exactly.
Like, people weren't just going to Walmart to buy a new bike tire or something for their carriage or whatever. Yeah, they had to get somebody to build it nearby, locally. You know, and they didn't have tow trucks to carry their...
Right.
You know, it's a different time, and you realize how important that role was.
Oh, it was very important, yeah.
And were there any other blacksmiths in town during his time?
Yes, actually. For a good part of Mr. Braun's tenure on Front Street, there was another blacksmith. He was there for most of the time. This gentleman's name was Bill Hellenhaus, and his shop does not appear to have been as big as L. Braun's, but his shop stood where the parking lot for Mokena Video is nowadays, or at least the parking lot that's on the corner of Front Street and Wolf Road. And Mr. Hellenhaus, he originally came from Orland. He opened up shop, must have been in the years leading up to America's entry into World War I. And I think he went on almost as long as L. Braun did. He probably closed up shop around probably a handful of years before Mr. Braun. I'm thinking he was still going into the 50s, I think. 1950s.
That's pretty incredible that there was enough business even into the 50s to shoe horses.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But that shows why he would be chosen to go out to Aurora, because there probably was a lack of anybody doing it around, right?
Yeah, by that time in his life, yeah.
I mean, still going on, besides the lack, I mean, as you talked about, the danger involved in working with those metals and everything.
Yeah, right.
Is quite a bit. So.
It was, It was nothing to sneeze at, that's for sure.
Have you ever seen anything or knowingly seen anything that he made or worked on? Anything like that?
I have not, no. I wish so much that I could, even just to like hold a horseshoe or something that he made, or that he pounded onto a horse's hoof or something like that. That I think that would just be the coolest thing. Although, that does remind me of a little story. Bob Brainig, the man who owns a Mokena Video, told me that when he expanded his building back in the 90s, where the parking lot is now, when they were digging around for the foundations and whatnot, that he found some horseshoes.
Really?
So that makes me wonder if those were from Bill Hellenhaus's shop.
Sure.
And I wonder what he ever did with those, if he kept them or what. I wonder. I should ask him next time I bump into him. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, but
you know, there's got to be something out there somewhere. You know,
I'm sure. Yeah,
an old wagon wheel or something.
Yeah,
great. This is an interesting story. Again, a job and a role in town that was gone and extinct now, but vital to the community at the time.
Oh, definitely it was. Yeah. Big deal.
Really interesting. All right. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Matt. Great
Absolutely.
story.
Thanks for having me.
Matt and I both really hope that you're enjoying the podcast and that you enjoyed this episode. We would really appreciate it if you would share our podcast with your friends or family, as well as leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you hear our podcast. We'd love to hear your show ideas or your questions, so you can send us an email at podcast@MokenasFrontPorch.com or on Facebook through Messenger or through our website, which is MokenasFrontPorch.com. You can send us a message there. We have a link in the show notes to Matt's blog post that this episode was based on. We have some great things coming up, and we're really excited to share with you. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Mokena's Front Porch.